Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor at USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Yeah? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. We're delighted you're in class with us today. 2 hours. We broadcast 2 hours from high atop the Missouri Ozark Mountains. There's a link to your instructors on the website. If you'd like to call us, 866-582-9933. 866-582-9933. Telephone listen line is up. It's delayed. It's not the one you're used to. Here's a different number, 701-719-0914. 701-719-0914. Marty Barrett's with us. Marty Barrett is an educator. She has been teaching, instructing students for over 2 decades at the college level. And we're going to be talking about what I call the crisis in education. Welcome, Marty Barrett.
Hey, thanks. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Marty teaches the hard sciences. She teaches biology at the college level. And, Marty, you prepare nurses
Yes.
for their lifelong journey, correct?
Before they get in the nursing program, they got to get through me. And so I figure I'm protecting all of us every day.
and thank you for doing that. So, Marty, let's start with this. It's a Fox News article. Fox 45, looks like Fox 45. Fox Baltimore, okay, .com. And it says, an alarming discovery coming out of the city schools. Project Baltimore analyzed 2017 state testing data and found that 1/3 of high schools in Baltimore last year had zero. Let me say it a different way. None. No students proficient in math. Not one.
Wow.
Not one student, in 1/3 of the high schools in Baltimore. They couldn't find one student who was proficient in math. Let me just add to that some other information that I've learned, and that is the Baltimore School District has, I believe, the highest administrative cost in the country. So it costs more to run the administration of the Baltimore public school system than any place else in the country. That's what I remember reading.
With those results.
Now, yeah. And so how does that square with what we've heard, teachers who are on strike saying, you know what, more money. The problem is we need more money. The schools need more money. We don't have enough money to educate our children. However, we were able to educate children in the 1960s, the 1950s, 70s, with way, way less funding than we have today. So does that, am I saying anything that's foreign to you? Do you believe that's true, that we have students who are not proficient in math?
Oh, definitely. And I see students in college-level courses that if you were trying to remediate them, you'd have to go back to the 3rd grade. They're on that level.
Literally?
And somehow they got pushed along all through school. So when they get to the college level, they're eager, they're hardworking, but how are you going to catch up that much material?
Yeah.
It's sad.
Yeah.
And also in my children's school, they have a course. If you don't take the statewide exam and pass it, then they put you in a special course, which is like preparation for the test. It doesn't make you any smarter. It just makes you able to pass that test.
Okay, Marty, I remember when I was consulting for several school districts in the Commonwealth of Virginia that some teachers were being accused of teaching to the test, meaning students, if you were asked this question, what would the answer be? Well, the answer would be, here's the answer, and that's called teaching to the test. And that was because the statewide tests were designed to make sure that education was uniform. And the teachers were threatened with, if you don't have whatever percentage of your students passing this test, you will probably be fired as a teacher. Because it's the teacher's fault for not being able to train the students to regurgitate the material that the teacher presents. That's the problem. And so we've taken out of our, we've removed from the teachers the ability to add information, subtract information from what they teach. Is that correct?
In some places, yes. In high school, I had to take a statewide exam after each course I took in high school. And if you got less than, I guess it was 70, even if you got A's all year long in class, you failed that course and had to take that all over again. And I think that it did one thing, though. It made me a better test taker because I was used to taking tests after every course. Now I see students that get so excited and nervous about taking a test that they're incapable of passing.
Are you saying because of the mental state, they are so agitated? They're so anxious?
I had a student once who said, I can't sit down and take a test. I have to be at a desk and circle around the desk and just pace up and down the room while I take the test because I'm that agitated. And I put a desk off to the side for her and let her run around whatever she wanted to do. And she passed the test. Marty, I'm thinking about how would that work in the workplace, okay? Not well.
We're talking about, all right, so if this person were to become a nurse and the nurse were taking orders from the doctor, would that nurse say, you know what, I feel kind of stressed.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to circle the bed, or I'm gonna have to circle you, doctor, while you stand there because I can't do it staying still. Is that the kind of thing we're talking about, literally?
Probably, and even worse than that, I have a lot of students that have accommodations where they get 3 times the extra time to take a test. Well, that's fine, except for what if your patient is in cardiac arrest and you have to take 3 times as long to decide what to do about it? That's not a good situation. So I would think that people with accommodations to get extra time would not make a good healthcare professional.
I was having lunch at one of my friend's house. He happens to be a medical professional, a doctor. And he said, I remember him saying to me years ago, Vinny, what do you call the guy at the bottom of the class in medical school? What do you call that guy who tests last? He actually does worse than everybody else. He's the bottom. What do you call him? And the answer is doctor.
Yeah. Or Dr.
If he's in that graduating class. Yeah, if he's in that graduating class, he's still a doctor. So that's the guy you don't want, right? Okay, so we're talking about test taking. And you and I were on the phone yesterday chatting. And class, Marty and I have been friends for a very long time, since the early 70s. And we've stayed in touch all these years. And we get a chance to chat and compare notes, and even though we're over 1,000 miles apart, our families have still stayed in touch. Marty, you were telling me on the phone about a student that you had who complained about the kind of test that you...
Right. I had a student who said she couldn't pass my test because I had some fill-ins and some essays. And she said she's not used to any test where you have to put in words. She was only used to tests where you'd have to fill in the little block on a Scantron, where all the choices are given to you and you pick the correct choice. Nothing where she had to think of the words involved.
So we're talking about the crisis in education. And by the way, I'm sorry that we lost the connection. And that's the kind of thing that's happening more and more often. So, Patrick, do we have Marty back? Okay. Hey, Marty, I'm glad you're back. I got disconnected as well.
Oh, okay. I was talking away to you, and
okay. So we were talking about
you not to answer. I was explaining about the student that failed my test, and she said that it was my problem because she'd never taken a test before where you had to put in any words. I have some fill-in answers and some essays on my exams, and the only exams she'd taken in college so far were all multiple choice, fill in a little block on the Scantron sheet, and that's what she thought college was all about. Well, I told her there's no word bank, there's no multiple choice in life. You kind of have to come up with the answers, and she was floored that that's what life is all about.
And okay, and did you explain to her what it would be like? Is the patient having problem A, problem B, problem C, kind of turning blue? What do you think we should do here? Which one is it? Because the treatment is going to depend. Yeah. Do we cut off the arm, the leg? Is it a heart attack? What actually is it? Wow. We'll be right back. Talking with Marty Barrett about education today, the public school education, specifically college and the hard sciences. Patrick, by the way, Patrick's engineering the broadcast in Minnesota. Patrick, if I get disconnected, I'm going to call you up on the landline right away. So we'll just keep going. It'll take me about 15 seconds to reconnect. So I just want to let you know we're having trouble with our communications connection today. So, Marty, we're talking about test taking, and it sounds like the students who are almost grown are having trouble. Are you finding that they are melting down before tests? Do they literally need hand holding for exams?
Some do, yes. It seems like they're not really used to exams that count. That they always say, I'd like to retake that test. Well, in the hard sciences, you really can't allow retakes, but they're used to getting out of every situation. There's always an out.
Yeah. So let me ask Patrick, our engineer, a question. Patrick, I'm not so comfortable with today's broadcast. It's been kind of choppy. Can we redo it?
No.
Yeah. Yeah, right now.
But don't worry about it. It's fine.
It's a do-over.
Dude, there's no do-over.
I'm not. So, I think we could do better. Maybe I should take some meds. Maybe
you should.
And I could use several of the tries. Do over until like monkeys typing Shakespeare. Eventually, they'll get it. They'll stumble upon something correct.
Marty, do you ever talk to the parents of some of these students? Do they come in, with their hands on their hips, saying, I'm outraged at what you're doing, Marty Barrett. You're expecting my child to do X, Y, and Z, and that's really too much. Have you ever experienced that?
Rarely, because most of my students are beyond the age at which I'm allowed to talk to the parents, over 18. But I did have one time. Apparently, she found out what type of car I drove. I pulled in the parking lot, and this woman was right at my door, my car, and she said, "Today's the final exam. My son has to pass. That he got into some college to transfer, and if he doesn't pass this course, he doesn't get in."
Mm-hmm.
And I just said, well, that's up to him, not to me. And she wouldn't leave me alone. She followed me all the way into the classroom. And her son was this big 6-foot glump, that I think he was old enough to take care of himself, but got mommy on the scene. And it turned out he actually pulled it out himself. He passed the exam.
Oh, great. And that's what we'd like. I had a similar experience, not exactly bit by bit the same, but I had the person who was very, very well known in the county. Everybody knew this guy because he had a business that everybody used. He was in the financial sector, and he was the president of this group. And so everybody, had a car loan in the area. Everybody who had an account, had one with this particular organization. And I had a meeting because his child wasn't doing as well as he would have liked. And no one really said, Vinny, can you do better? I mean, can you alter this, this number to make it look better? Nobody said that, but I think that might have been the intent. Because
sure.
the next thing that happened is that student withdrew from my class. Because I think, although it was never said, can we, make a lower grade higher? And although it was never said, you're out of your mind, I'm not doing it. I think we arrived at a point where Vinny wasn't going to budge, and the student withdrew. Now, the student was very nice, very, a sweet person, but was no longer in the class. So I've seen just a hint of what you're talking about, and I've also seen the pass along. I had a student who was just not paying attention. I would present what I thought was great education. I'd work over the weekend and present some material on Monday morning, and this one student would just have his hoodie covering his face, his head. He'd put his head down and blame me for picking on him when it was his turn to answer the question as we went around the table. A large table for small student teaching environment. But it was my fault because I was picking on him because of his particular race. So he said. Marty Barrett's with us. Marty, I was thinking about study hall proctors. A person who would sit at a study hall and his or her job would be just to maintain order, to prevent chaos from erupting in the classroom, and tell the students, okay, I don't know anything about this subject, but your instructor said read these pages, do this worksheet, and try to stay in your seats. And that's what I remember as study hall proctors doing, or teachers that would fill in for other teachers, or lay people that would fill in for teachers. Are we headed toward that kind of a thing in education, where instead of that we would have computers taking over, computer screens taking over the education of our students, but yet we would have a person sitting there just trying to prevent chaos from erupting in that classroom setting with no teacher except an adult trying to maintain order, and the students studying what they learn on screens? Is that happening?
Well, it's even worse than that. They're in their house doing it with no proctor. So it becomes kind of a contest as far as who could Google the answer quicker or look through their textbook quicker to get the answers for the exam. They're not proctored at all.
Are you saying...
So you can have students that, are the fastest Googlers, and they're getting ahead.
Marty, from your perspective, removing the live person, the teacher, from the classroom and replacing the classroom and the teacher and the peers from the, I don't even know if we can call it a learning environment, and moving that to a person's home.
I can see how that has to take place in some instances. If somebody can't get to school, it serves a purpose there. But if you can get to school, it seems like it's the interactions you get there and the examples of the principles you're learning are better explained in person with a live person that can also shift the focus, where somebody says, oh, is that like when this happened? Yeah, and then you can go into something else. Instead of a canned thing that only has to go in a certain order, can't deviate at all.
And so by not having the peers in the classroom, meaning your fellow classmates, do you think that's detrimental to the educational process because of the... Okay. You were telling me off air something that dovetails very, very well with this, and that was a particular industry that has a mandatory coffee break hour.
Right.
Or break time. Tell us about that and how that relates to the education and what we are removing from education by having students sit at computer screens?
Well, this was at a pharmaceutical company that I looked at, and I was taking a tour, and at 10 o'clock in the morning, everybody has to take a mandatory coffee break, all in the same place. And they've kind of arranged this place so there's whiteboards and blackboards around the room. And what they're hoping to do is these people that are working on a project who are kind of maybe have a little bit of tunnel vision at their own project and just can't get over some kind of obstacle. Maybe when I talk to you about my obstacle, you've got a suggestion. So if you talk about work a little bit during this coffee hour, you could maybe overcome some things that are really sticklers in the development of a new drug or something. And I think it's brilliant. Mm-hmm. People that might never meet each other can get input from other areas.
Marty, when I was working as a designer at one of the banks, we had a lunch hour. And what would happen is a lot of the guys would sit at the same table, lunch after lunch after lunch. And a lot of the gals would sit at the same table. And literally what happened is exactly what you're talking about. We would use that time. Yeah, we talk about, personal things, like what we're doing, for the weekend, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But a lot of what we talked about was solving the problems that we had at the company, meaning, design problems, how will that interact with this other department? And we might even go over to the other tables where, some of our fellow workers who we didn't see very often, but whatever we were doing would impact their department. We'd go and join them, and we would solve problems together. And it was on our time, because it was our lunch hour. However, we used it effectively, but nobody said, you will do this. However, they provided the opportunity where we all went to lunch together. So it was unwritten, but we did that back in the 1980s, the early 1980s, and it was a fabulous, fabulous benefit to everybody because we made our company more competitive, we made better services for our customers, and we enjoyed it more. It was like a triple win.
Yep.
But
and such a simple thing.
Yeah, but what you're talking about is removing that concept from the classroom.
Right.
What do you think the reason is? Why? Well, let me ask you this. At your institution of higher learning, are the top brass interested in more teachers, fewer teachers, more computer screens, fewer computer screens, more personal interaction, less personal interaction? Where do you see the trend going?
Well, already full-timers are a dying breed. I think at my institution where maybe 15% of the classes are taught by full-timers. The rest are adjuncts. And the adjuncts, in many cases, bring interesting things to the classroom because they have real-life experience. So I don't mean to make it sound like all adjuncts are horrible. But I have one particular adjunct that said, I was told this course kind of runs itself online. And now I have to do all this work. Why am I having to do work on this?
You're kidding.
And it just amazed me that would be the attitude. That it's if you're teaching an online course, that you plug it in and let it go, and that's it.
Marty, when you first started teaching, how many hours a week were you in the actual classroom?
On the college level?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
20.
So you're in front of the students for 20 hours a week, which would be half of a typical 40-hour work week, for someone in industry, for example. All right. What was the rest of that time? Did you prepare for those classes? And if so, how much? Okay.
And
how much time did you?
The first time you teach a class, it takes at least 3 hours per hour of lecture to prepare it, even the first time. Mm-hmm. And then it evolves over time where you realize, I should change this around a little bit, or I read something interesting and it applies here. So, it's always evolving. But the first time, you probably make 10 cents an hour in your job because you're busy writing and rewriting and making exams and redoing exams, and it's time-consuming. It's not a 40-hour-a-week job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I understand that. I understand that very well. I was a teacher, and doing what I do now behind the microphone, Mrs. Finelli, if someone asks her, what do I do? She says, he talks. But before I talk, I spend hours and hours reading. And I have notebooks, stacks of notebooks, several feet high, of all the notes that I've taken for broadcasts that I've done, including I've got one right in front of me right now about this broadcast. So what you're saying
make it look too easy. That's the problem.
Well, I guess we're supposed to make it look easy. But so are you saying that the full-time teachers, Marty, are, as a dying breed, are they jumping ship, or are they getting fired, or are they retiring? What's causing there to be only 15% when it used to be darn close to 100% full-time teaching?
As they retire or quit or whatever, they're replaced with adjuncts.
Is that because adjuncts
benefits or anything? And for a while, the adjuncts were given, several classes, but then a bunch of adjuncts got together and decided they wanted to start a union.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they kind of shot themselves in the foot, because now adjuncts are only allowed at my institution to teach 2 classes, maybe 3 if there's a real emergency.
Mm-hmm.
But they used to give them more, whatever they needed, kind of. But now, since they made a stink about being, how come they don't get benefits and everything, now they're only allowed 2, usually a maximum of 2 classes. So we just have tons of adjuncts, and you have to keep weeding out the ones that aren't working out. But every ones that don't work out, how many students are they impacting that got a bad grade on that, bad education in that course?
I was talking with our son. We were in the truck one day recently. He decided that he wanted to attend the public training camp for high school. He'd never been to school. He was homeschooled. And so we're talking about farming, and just 2 of us in the truck. And I said to him, didn't you take biology? Because he didn't know the answer to a question they were talking about. He said, yeah, Dad, but my biology teacher was an English teacher.
Oh.
And he said that his teacher told him that he was learning it with the students. So the teacher would read the book and then regurgitate the book in class, and you could ask him some questions. Most questions he couldn't answer because he didn't know, because he wasn't trained in the subject he was teaching. Now, do you see that as well?
On occasion, but not usually.
Okay.
Usually they require a master's in the subject you're teaching. Mm-hmm. So usually, hopefully you would know something, but I've seen some. I was asked to go in with one instructor one time when it wasn't working out to team teach with him. Mm-hmm. And it was disturbing because he would say stuff that he didn't really understand. Somebody would ask a question, and he would just kind of stand there squirming. And it was awful. So in some cases, they don't know enough about what they're teaching.
Wow. And we're paying for this. We're actually paying for this. And whose fault is that? I'm going to have to blame the administration. I'm going to have to blame the administration for putting the wrong person in the classroom, because it rises to that level. And what do you do in a case like that? Well, you fire the administration. We'll be right back. We're live. Marty Barrett's with us, and she's a college instructor for over 20 years. And we got a call from Mike in Kansas City. Welcome, Mike. Let's see.
And I was actually calling for James McKinney, but maybe you can field this question also. And it has to do with the topic of catastrophism.
Well, I'll tell you what. We are talking about a catastrophe, but in education. It's a catastrophe in education. So you probably want to talk to Professor McKinney directly when he's live. Okay?
Because I learned about catastrophism at a university, an educational facility.
Okay, so what is your question, Mike?
The thing is, rapid earth changes. There's a discipline in science called catastrophism, and it deals with rapid earth changes, and it could happen with a Planet X-like body.
Okay.
Or
Mike,
it could even happen with Mars having a different orbit at one time.
Mike, hold that thought. I suggest you call Professor McKinney when he's on the air and ask him that question directly. It's off topic for us. We're talking about the educational system here in the United States in college. But thanks for your call.
McKinney is on the air.
Yeah. There he goes. Okay. Hey, Marty. So discipline issues. Tell me about discipline issues. What is it like in the classroom today?
Some students that don't have any control in their own life try to decide they're going to take over your role. And they ask questions like, is this class over now? Or you say, you state a fact, and they say, oh, I always heard it was this. And even if it's at the very end of the class and they say, isn't the class over now? I would say, no, you get your money's worth till the very last minute. Even if it was time to go, they're not in charge of when we go. I'm not going to give them that power.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're fussing around with their keys and slamming their notebook and letting me know that they want to go, I might just go a little bit longer just to let them know that I'm in charge of when it ends, not them. And I see all kinds of cheating, too.
What do the other students think about class disruption? Do they realize that there's a cost associated with them sitting in that class, and it's astronomical? Do they understand that they're paying for this by the second to hear you dispense your wisdom, your experience, and training? Do they understand that this is what it's all about?
Yeah, sometimes I had a guy this semester who kind of talked a lot about his own experiences, and some students would roll their eyes and sigh, and give us both the clue that I should cut them short a little bit. Okay.
I was giving a speech or a presentation at a convention, and I had a heckler.
Oh.
And it was kind of fun. The heckler was so crowded that every seat was filled. There was standing room only, and the heckler they seemed to get some seats right parallel to me, almost on stage. Okay, and so my heckler was to my left, and so what I did was I addressed him. He kept saying that everything I was saying was wrong at one point in time, and I addressed him and I said to the group, to the attendees, how many of you'd like to hear this man talk? And they said no. And then I looked at this guy and I said, you know what, sir, I don't think I can guarantee your safety. I think
you're looking out for him. That's nice.
I'm just looking out for him. And so I asked him to leave quietly while he could still get out safely, because the group was getting annoyed with him.
Mm-hmm.
That was how I handled that. But it was a great experience for me to experience that challenge of being heckled. I happen to be talking about the moon landing. But so the students are not as disciplined as maybe we were when we were in class. Is that true?
Oh, definitely not. Definitely not. But they're not usually unruly. I try to the first time say something like, come on, you guys, just keep it down. Not pointing them out. But if it gets more and more, I make a deal about it, because that makes it so somebody else can't hear, and kind of disrupts my thought processes sometimes if I see a lot of talking going on.
Yeah. Marty, hey, thanks so much for being with us. Merry Christmas.
Same to you.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. By the way, class, if you're wondering what the crash of 1929, October 1929 was like, it's just like what's happening to Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Litecoin right now. Right now. They have absolutely, positively crashed. And what am I talking about? Well, since yesterday, Litecoin is down 22%. Ethereum, down 20%. Bitcoin, down 19%. But it was down even more than that yesterday. Absolute flash crash. And I was talking with Miles over the week. I was talking with Miles yesterday. And we were talking about these crashes. And if you don't have the stomach for it, please do not dabble in this experience of high risk adventures. And I'm talking about the alternative currencies. Absolute straight line down crash. And I got a note from Rich Sheeman. He sent me an email. It's like letting me know how bad it is. And it is absolutely terrible. For example, Bitcoin, several days ago, about a week ago or so, was around just under 20,000. Now it's 12,000 and change. Yeah. Litecoin was a high of 375. It's down to 233. Bitcoin Cash was over $4,000. Now it's $2,200. We're talking just in a matter of days, just a few days. No kidding. So if you want to know what the great crash of 1929 is like, you are living it if you are heavily invested in alternative currencies. If you decide to do this, be very, very careful. Do your own research. Don't believe anyone. No exaggeration. This hour, I'm delighted to be broadcasting with Kyle Harris, and we're going to be talking about electrical wiring, alternating current type wiring, home wiring, things that you need to know about. Kyle's got well over 3 decades experience as a professional in the electrical world. Welcome, Kyle.
Hey, good morning, Vince. You know, I'm always leery of that word professional. You know what I mean? Because I'm always learning. You know, and I never feel like I get to the point. I figure a professional is pretty well somebody that knows pretty much all of it. And I can't say that I'm there yet, but because I constantly am learning to this, and I have run into lots of professionals that I literally wouldn't give the time of day hardly as far as how much they knew and could do.
Yeah. Well, let's say it this way: as a profession, you earned a living in this field. How about that?
Yeah, that sounds good. You know, I was listening to you with Marty just a few minutes ago, and I was on a school board for 13 years, and it's a little bitty school. And anyway, we dealt with a lot of kids that were struggling and some that weren't, and it was pretty much almost a one-room schoolhouse setup. And the teachers had to be very versatile. They had to. At one point, we had one teacher covering 5 grades, but there'd only be like 12 kids. And so, but they were extremely, we were very good at watching over what was going on and helping the kids wherever they were. And we had 2 kids that transferred out of our area there. And when they transferred into a large public school, they had to jump them ahead 2 grades.
Yeah.
Both of them.
Makes sense.
You know, it's just a matter of, it's a matter of teaching anymore rather than cranking out, using a professional quote-unquote system, and that's, again, that word, but that really isn't accomplishing what really needs to be done. And it amazes me, it really does amaze me how much money is out there floating around for schools. We thought we had some major problem come up in our little school building there, and there was no money for it that we knew of or anything. And so we went into the county and talked to them and everything, and the lady said, well, we could just access this fund over here. Well, crying out loud, I'd never heard of that fund over here, but come to find out there was like $250,000 in this thing. Yep. It's just amazing to me that there's little funds that people don't know about, you know, that the high cost of education has got a lot of tentacles.
Right. Our daughter has been homeschooled, and she was finished with high school at, between age 13 and 14. At 14, she started going to college. By 19, she finished with her master's in business administration. So you're absolutely right. It does work. Homeschooling takes out a lot of the wasted time that you see in the public training camp. It really does. You don't have to ride the bus an hour each way. You can have lunch sooner. Everything is learning. Going to the supermarket with young children is a learning adventure. You learn about volume. You learn about ounces. You learn about cost per ounce. You learn about alternatives. And a lot of young people miss out on those experiences when they are at the public training camp. You know, Kyle, I spent some time with one of our dear friends who has an older farmhouse. It was built in the 60s. And by the way, I told him something that, you know, when you buy a house and it's an older house and you want to know about when it was built, what you can do is you can take the lid off the toilet tank, because typically, if the appliances were installed originally in the house, stamped in the toilet tank is the date of manufacture. So if it was built in 1965, it'll say 1965 in the porcelain inside, and you can read it when you take the lid off the toilet tank. That's assuming that the toilet had not been replaced. So if it's an original toilet, it's about within a year or so of when the house was built. And so we were working on a house that was built in the 60s, and there was a contractor that came in, a general contractor, and he did, the walls and sheetrock and those kinds of things. And we found some mistakes, things that we've been fixing, and it's been taking weeks and weeks and weeks to find all these little wiring errors. And we're having a bite to eat, and I looked up at the ceiling fan, and I said, we found a number of mistakes. Before we're done, we need to take that ceiling fan off, because I don't know if the ceiling fan, the electrical box that ceiling fan is mounted on, is one that can support the weight of a ceiling fan. Have you had an experience with the standard box that you would buy at Lowe's or Home Depot, the standard $2 box, the round 4-inch box, used for a ceiling fan that flat out is not designed to support the weight, the vibration, or the movement of a ceiling fan? Have you experienced that?
Oh, yeah, many times. In fact, my daughter just purchased a house, her and her husband, and she had some new fixtures put in, and they had a ceiling fan up there. And it literally, I could see a gap on one side, and there was no gap on the other side. And it was just a plastic box. So I had to get up in there, and that's all it was, held in with 2 nails on one side,
Right,
so I tore it all down, went up in there and got my hands up so I could put a 2x4 across the two roof joists in between that would support that box. Then I put a couple screws up in that box and supported it that way. Just kind of making it do for her, but still it would be permanent and it'd last, But, I agree with you. I've run into some of these old houses like this many times, actually, where people just think, they don't know any better. They want to be, the guy wants to be, handy. And so, which is good. They want to try something, but when you don't know what you're doing with electricity and when you're dealing with weight in particular, you got to be really careful. When you're taking that stuff down, boy, make sure you know what the circuit it is and make sure the breaker's off, because I have seen them. I saw one time. I wasn't working on it, but there was another electrician working with me, and he started taking the fan down, and all of a sudden the fan dropped plumb loose, and the only thing holding it was the wires, then the wire nuts on the electrical, and then the hot slipped out of the wire nut and sprung back up into the box. And well, it just so happened that there was ground wires in there, and that thing sprung right up into the ground wire and arced and scared the fire out of him. It tripped the breaker. Then he found out which one it was. It was kind of funny, sure. But I mean, nobody got hurt. It could have been serious, but at the time, it was just funny to see somebody leap off of the ladder like he was on fire.
Yeah. Well, here's the point for our broadcast classroom, that a lot of the ceiling fixtures, if you have a home that was built in the last maybe 25 years or so, most of the boxes that are used are these blue plastic boxes. And even the ceiling fixtures, which are typically very lightweight, can be supported with these round 4-inch boxes that literally, as Kyle said, have 2 nails in them. And the nails are hammered from the side, and they're really designed for a couple pounds. They're not designed to support a 20-pound ceiling fan that has starting torque and that may vibrate. Literally, these plastic boxes are not designed for ceiling fans. Even the metal boxes that have the 2 little ears on them that you attach the screws to, they're not designed for ceiling fans either. The ceiling fans require a box, an electrical box made out of metal that can support the weight of a ceiling fan. And they cost 5 times as much. So instead of a $2 box, it's a $10 box. But you know what? If that thing is over your bed, you really want it to stay up. So what we're going to do in my friend's house is we're going to remove the escutcheon for all of his ceiling fans, and we're going to check to make sure that those electrical boxes are sturdy enough to support the ceiling fans. We'll be right back. Kyle Harris is with us, and we're talking about electricity in the home. Kyle, I had a job back in the mid-1970s, and the big boss had a relatively new home. And he came in one day, now this was in the 70s, and he said there was a fire at his house, and it started behind his couch. And he mentioned that his home was wired with aluminum wire rather than copper. So as you know, Kyle, homes built between 1965 and 1972, many of them used aluminum as the branch circuit wiring, the 15 and 20 amp circuits. And what are the problems that you know about, Kyle, with aluminum wiring, and what concerns do we need to share with our classroom for those who may have aluminum wiring in their homes?
The most dangerous thing I have ever seen in my life has been aluminum wiring. To be honest with you, Vince, I was in a house one time where the lady had 3 outlets. Just 3 little outlets and around this room, and none of them were working. And so I thought, well, this is an easy job. I'll go in there and start doing this. And so I pulled the first outlet out and found out which one was closest to the panel that would be the, in first in line, because that's usually where your problem is. But anyway, so I took this thing out of there and I started to pull the receptacle. Of course, the circuit was off. I started to pull the receptacle out, and the aluminum hot that was in there was aluminum on the hot neutral too, but the aluminum hot was so corroded and so oxidized with white kind of a powdery-looking substance that people, I know what it is. It's a corrosion and an interaction between the aluminum and the copper in the receptacle. But it looks, for somebody that doesn't know, it looks sort of like a white corrosion powder like you would see on your battery, your car battery when if it's corroded up. But anyway, it snapped plumb off, broke. It was so corroded that it just broke. And what was hard about it was every time I would strip off a new wire, this thing was so old and so brittle, I would strip off another little chunk of wire and it would break again. It was just so brittle. It was amazing. I finally got to the point to where I stripped it back and finally was very, very gentle with this and very careful, and I hooked some chemical called Noox. Keeps the oxidation off, and I made a pigtail called just a little section of copper wire, and I hooked those two together, and then I hooked the little pigtail, the copper pigtail, to the regular the receptacle, put a new receptacle in there and hooked it all back up that way. But you have to use that Noox or some similar product to put it on aluminum wire anytime you're touching it to anything copper. Otherwise, there's a metal transfer there in the electricity that will cause it to oxidize really bad, and it creates heat, and then you can get a fire that way.
Mm-hmm. Class, we're talking about a Noox, N-O-O-X, short for no oxidation, I'm sure. And it comes in a little tube, like maybe a travel-sized tube of toothpaste. And it's the consistency, Noox is the consistency of kind of like toothpaste. And you just smear it on the connection, and it prevents further oxidation of that connection.
Mm-hmm.
But the bottom line is, don't use aluminum wire at all. As a matter of fact,
right.
It doesn't meet code for branch circuits now, and it hasn't since 1972, if I'm not mistaken. So aluminum wiring is dangerous for branch circuits. However, aluminum wire is the predominant material, or aluminum cable, I should say, is the predominant material for the high-capacity conductors, like from your power pole down the side of your house, aluminum, to the meter, from your meter to your breaker box, if it's a relatively new one, that's aluminum, and that's perfectly acceptable, isn't it, Kyle?
Yes, it is. I still use no-ox on all those connections, though, every single one.
Mm-hmm. There you go. When we come back, Kyle, let's talk about some tools, inexpensive tools that you can buy. You can buy them on eBay for testing the hot lead. If you want to know if, well, you've shut the breaker off, but is it really off? You know, and before you take that receptacle or switch out, and you want to know, is it still electrified or hot? Kyle Harris is with us. Kyle, I have a blue bag that has handles on it, and that's where I keep my electrical supplies. So when I, go upstairs, downstairs, go visit a friend's house, or help someone out with wiring, I bring this bag with me, and it has a Phillips screwdriver, a number 2 Phillips. It's got a small slotted screwdriver and a larger slotted screwdriver, and I have some outlets in it, and I have some test equipment and some homemade test equipment. For example, a long wire, like 30 feet long, with insulated alligator clips, small ones on each end, that I use to test continuity and things like that. What do you recommend that someone who's building their blue bag, if you will, of tools, where should they start? What kind of test equipment should they, in terms of value, what would be one of the first things that they should consider buying, then maybe the second and the third? Well,
just like you were talking, something if you're depends somewhat on your level of ability. Some old boys that are really handy that have done this, a long time, can get a fairly complicated meter with a amp clamp on it, and so you could read amps across legs if you wanted to. Some guys get that, but most of the time, you go down here, you get a little meter at Walmart that's $10, or someplace or wherever you get them. Little $10 meter, something that's got ohms, something that shows amps, AC and DC voltage. Anyway, that's what I want, at least that. But if you're just checking for voltage, and all you need to do is go along, there's the little plug-ins, that'll show you if you've got that you can just plug into the socket, and you can see if it's got, your ground is good, your hot's good. They'll read that kind of stuff, and little lights will come on for you. Just stuff like that. I have a whole toolbox that's set up for electrical that whenever I'm going to help somebody, it has all of the different types of tools that I know that's a possibility that I might have to use. So I carry a regular toolbox, and then I just back up in my shop, put the toolbox in my car or truck, and if I'm going to somebody's house, that way I know pretty much always I've got it. It's got wire nuts in it and everything, but it weighs, it weighs 30 pounds. So. Right.
Sounds like mine. And Kyle, one of the thing that you were talking about, this little plug-in device, class, it is a 3 conductor or 3-prong plug, and it has 3 lights on it. And generally they are of a neon light, and they may be all 3 the same color, or they may be different colors. But this device is about $5. Maybe you can get it for $4. And it has 3 neon lights, typically. And when you plug this into a standard receptacle, if it lights up with 2 of the lights, it is telling you, and it says right on this little tester, that that receptacle is wired properly, meaning it has a good neutral, it has a good ground, and it has a good hot, and they are all wired in the right place, and it's working properly. And if you have one light or a different combination of lights other than these 2 lights side by side, it will tell you exactly what the problem is. And it's a great little tester. And if you feel that you have to buy someone a present for Christmas, That would be a great gift for a do-it-yourselfer who's interested in wiring. And it would be a great little tool to have for yourself to go and check all of your receptacles to make sure that they've been wired properly to begin with. Okay? It'll tell you if there's a problem. And it's so inexpensive. Kyle, do you have one of those non-contact voltage testers that it's like a pen, it's like a thick pen. It's about the size of a Sharpie pen. It has a plastic tip on it, and you touch the insulation of a wire with this, or you get close to it, and it goes beep, 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 to let you know that that wire is electrified. It is carrying AC current. Do you carry one of those with you?
I do, as a matter of fact. That's kind of funny you would bring. I haven't thought about that because I haven't done, where I'm testing that kind of stuff. I haven't done that in a few years. But so I'm very reluctant, Vince. Depending on people's skill level, I'm so reluctant to tell them to go out and attempt electricity by themselves. So, you know, if you're going to do this, I highly suggest if you get into an old house like Vince's friend there, either call somebody that is very competent, especially if you're trying to diagnose problems, or get an electrician. I've just seen so many times where people have, they just don't know enough about what they're doing, and that is one very dangerous place to be when you're dealing with something that'll kill you. So I'm saying this, if you do it at your own risk kind of thing. I'm not giving advice on how to do this stuff in the sense of, I want somebody that doesn't know anything to go out there and attempt this. The gentleman that you're helping had enough common sense to call you, and you're very competent with almost everything that I've been able to talk to you about, from auto mechanics to electronics. So you're very good. So I'm just trying to say for people, if you're getting into an old house, call somebody competent, because there's so many things that can happen. I have found neutrals that were hooked up to hots. I have found people took three-ways and did three-way switches where you can turn off one switch on one side of the room and turn it back on the other side of the room. Had them wired directly so that when they flip the switch, it tripped the breaker. You know, if it's not correctly wired up, it'll make a mess, and you can really cause fires, get somebody hurt bad. I'm very reluctant to even tell somebody about YouTube or any of those things, because people's ability to perceive sometimes what it is that you're looking at, unless you have some kind of a base of understanding, or some kind of, you're a good reader, good studier, and you've read these books and you understand what it is they're talking about, just please be careful, because and take the precautions necessary to your ability. And don't be afraid to ask somebody for help, because you can seriously get yourself hurt bad. And more people are killed with 120 volts than any other voltage. So,
yeah. And class, here's an interesting thing. I wanted to help my friend with wiring, and my plan was not to do it for him. Okay, my plan was to do it with him and have this be a class. It was just two of us in the class, my friend and me. And he happens to be a USA Prepares instructor. And he helps me and I help him. And it's a wonderful relationship. And I hope that many of you can have the same kind of relationship with people whom you know. But I wanted to have this be an educational experience. And I got one of the greatest joys last week on Friday when we were done with the portion of wiring that he and I did together. Now, this has been an adventure that's been at least 12 classes, 12 almost all day long classes to determine what his house wiring is and to fix it. He had a professional electrician come out there to look at it, and the electrician threw up his hands and said, I can't do this. And he left. before he even started. So it was extremely complex. And the only thing that I'm trying to say is that some things that are complex, you have to work on one step at a time. And that's what we did. And I bought him a book. And the book I bought him was used. And I said, this is a used book. Pages are falling out of it, but it is the best general purpose wiring book I've ever seen. And it's made by Black & Decker. And I said, now there are fewer pages falling out of the one I'm giving you than mine. But, and it's because it's an older book. And it's probably 10 years old. But it literally, the Black & Decker home wiring book is the best I've ever seen. Lots of pictures and diagrams, and the explanations are really good. But what happened last week was after the session, I said, so here's my question for you. Do you feel comfortable at this point in adding adding another outlet to an existing circuit that you already have? And I said it this way. So you think it's worth the time, the effort, and the expense to put an outlet in another location where there is no outlet because this is an older house? Do you feel comfortable doing that by yourself? And he said, absolutely. And I got the biggest grin on my face because that was the moment that I knew that my student has succeeded, to feel comfortable. And I know that he knows how to do it. Now, he's not a trained electrician, and neither am I. But we talked about the who, what, when, where, why, and how of everything that we did. And when it came to stripping the wires, he did it. When it came to pulling the wires, he did it. When it came time to read the ohm meter, he did it. When it came time to draw the diagram, we went over the diagram of exactly how everything went together. And it was a beautiful thing, Kyle. It really was. And I just want to share that moment publicly.
And can you imagine how dangerous doing all of that by himself would have been without your help?
Without some training, I think it certainly could have been. Because when I mentioned to him, we were in the kitchen area, and I said, let's look at this fan. And we were looking at the fan, and I explained it about the ceiling box that holds the fan in. And he said, you know what? That happened to a member of my family. She was at a motel, and the ceiling fan fell down while she was in bed. Missed her. Just missed her. Where are ceiling fans? Right over the bed, right? Isn't that where they are? Yep. In a lot of cases. Yep. And so that was one of those moments like, you're absolutely right. That's the next thing we're going to do. We're going to take that ceiling fan apart and look at it. Kyle and I will be right back. Kyle Harris is with us, and we're talking about wiring. And Kyle, if you were wiring a room, let's say you were going to not upgrade, but let's say you're going to finish a rec room or a basement room or something like that, would you wire the ceiling lights on a separate circuit from the wall outlets, or would you combine them? And why?
Well, I'll tell you, when I was wiring houses for a business, I didn't have to put this good of a circuit in there, but I did it anyway because my added expense gave me peace of mind. I would, like to a bedroom or something along those lines, I would run one 20-amp circuit for the entire bedroom if it was only requiring like one or two lights, because they tell you to gauge the amperage in a bedroom like at 1.5 amps for a light. But with these new LEDs, you're dealing with, sometimes a 20th of an amp, very small amount. And even if you're not, most of the time you're dealing with two 60-watt light bulbs in most fixtures. So you're dealing with 1 amp maximum. And if you put a 20-amp circuit to a bedroom, that allows them to put a heater in there if they want to. It gives them, and you're only dealing with 1 or 2 lights at the most usually, or plug-in lamp, So you can handle, a 20-amp circuit per bedroom is the way I wire things to go, as a rule. When you're getting into a rec room, something like that, I know a few guys, and I know you do, you pull a separate lighting circuit. I don't do that because if you're going to run a separate lighting circuit, chances are you're going to want that for like 3 or 4 rooms. You know what I mean? You're going to want the lights from 3 or 4 rooms on one circuit. I don't do that because if something were to happen, you lose all the lights. You know what I'm saying? So I wire, personally, I wire, you'll have 4 or 5 receptacles, say, to a room, to a bedroom or something along those lines, 4 or 5, and then a light. And that's, you've got it really well covered with a 20 amp, number 12 wire pulled to a 20 amp circuit and a 20 amp breaker into each bedroom. That's the way I do it.
Okay. Kyle, let me ask you this. Years ago, you used to see fuse panels. And fuses, whenever you saw a fuse panel, you'd see a stack of fuses on top of the fuse box, if you will, in the basements typically. And the reason they were there is because someone would blow a fuse, they'd go down to the basement with a flashlight, and they'd replace the fuse. Now, a lot of those circuits were 15 amp fuses, or 15 amp circuits with 15 amp fuses. But people would say, you know what, I'm sick of this. I'm tired of these fuses blowing. And they'd put a 20 amp fuse in there. Now, can you relate the dangers of that to our class, please? What are the dangers of putting a 20 amp fuse in a 15 amp circuit, or replacing that darn breaker, that 15 amp breaker that keeps tripping, with a 20 amp breaker? Just switching them seems to solve the problem, but would you talk about the dangers and why we should never do that?
A couple of things that a person needs to think about. If you're blowing a 15 amp circuit, that's where a little knowledge of Ohm's law really comes in handy. If you're blowing a 15 amp circuit, there is something wrong in the circuit. You better either find out what it is, or go back in there, call an electrician, call somebody that knows what they're doing, and figure out what the problem is. Because what you're asking for when you increase the size of the breaker or a fuse, if you do that, you're overloading the wiring. You're overloading that circuit with the potential, because you figure there's 200 amps coming off of your main, or 100 amps, and when you increase that other, your chances of a fire go up exponentially.
So, class, the point is, fuses, you blow them and then you replace them. You throw out the blown one. Circuit breakers, you just flip them back and reset them, and you're good to go. But if they keep blowing or tripping, there's a reason for that. Please don't replace a circuit breaker with one of greater capacity because the first one keeps tripping. Please don't do that. Find out what's going on first. Kyle Harris, thank you so much for being with us in class today. And Merry Christmas to your family. In class, Merry Christmas.